Well, I'm a member of the Church of England. I don't know if you know
Yes,
that.
of course you are.
One of the things that I notice is that we are constantly being given material to discuss. And there's one particular book that we've been asked to discuss, produced by the Central Church of England themselves, on different sexualities. It's called Living in Love and Faith. And it looks at what the church's attitude should be, for example, to same-sex relationships, as it now seems to be called. And it gives different points of view. The book Living in Love and Faith doesn't take a particular point of view. It presents the different points of view on that. My problem with it is that, as a Christian, I don't think there is more than one point of view, in that the Bible is very clear on what it teaches. So to present these other points of view as if they have equal weight for Christians seems to me very strange. And in my churches, despite pressure to do so, we haven't been discussing it.
Right.
When we have more time and leisure, it's a very big book, we may need to.
It seems to me that this book, Living in Love and Faith, tends to relate to the way that the Church of England relates to this country. Because the Church of England is the church for everyone, whether you are a Christian or not.
Yes, that is correct.
It's relating to that fact.
It is, yes. I believe, of course, wrongly. I think that the position of the Church of England is to reach out to all people with the good news of Jesus Christ. Now, the good news is that you can be set free to live good and wholesome lives. Good and wholesome lives doesn't include same-sex relationships. Now, you're at liberty to not be a Christian, and it's still the Church of England is your church. But that doesn't mean that the Church of England should change what it teaches, because it's there to represent Christ and his ways to you. You can accept or reject them.
I'd just like to point out here, being non-denominational, that the other churches that are not connected to the Church of England, they tend to have a different basis vis-à-vis the people living in the UK.
Yes.
Because they're not the church for everyone, they tend to be a church for the people who actually attend and who are the members.
True, yes. Earlier I said I was a member of the Church of England. Technically that's not true, in that you can't be a member, or everyone's a member, depending on how you look at it. Whereas other churches, which are often referred to as a gathered church, in that they gather into a congregation, so those who are gathered are the church. They have a different basis, as you say. But many successful large Church of England churches use that same model in practice. They're gathered churches. So they gather in together people, rather than seeing them just providing a service to the community. But there's a new book out by Stephen Croft, who's the Bishop of Oxford, and he's called his book Together in Love and Faith. I mean, actually, it's more of a booklet. It's quite a small book, whereas Living in Love and Faith is a big book. His book, responding to the bishop's opinions, the book Living in Love and Faith has been put out by the bishops of the Church of England. He proposes that the Church of England, in this book, Together in Love and Faith, that the Church of England should provide public services for the blessing of same-sex civil partnerships and marriages, but allow a conscience clause for those who dissent, and eventually the Church of England should conduct same-sex marriages. But there's a conscience clause. This is a view he shares with the 3 suffragan bishops, so his assistants, the other bishops in his diocese. But most large churches are evangelical, and strangely, this bishop, he appoints his assistants. He didn't appoint an evangelical bishop. He appointed yes men, yes women to the role of bishops. So that doesn't really mean anything that they were supporting him. But it's interesting that it seems to be a campaigning bishop for this point. So Ian Paul, we often comment on, who's a theologian who writes the blog Sophizo. He comments on this booklet saying, well, because this is then, in the end, very divisive, taking their view, the Bishop of Oxford isn't being very together about this. It's not together in love and faith. It's, let's go over by ourselves in a holy huddle over here, where we all believe that same-sex relationships are good and we should ask God to bless them, and you lot can go away. It's not together at all. It's the opposite.
Right.
He said the conscience clause means you opt out.
Has anybody asked him? Clearly, Ian Paul is asking him what the together means.
Yes, he is.
Does it mean that various bishops and senior officials in the Church of England should be together on it? Or does he mean that thinking of the basis on which the Church of England serves this country, that we should be together with people who believe in same-sex marriage.
Yeah, I see, yes. He's certainly making that point, but because of his actual proposal that we stay together as a church, I think he is talking about church leadership and congregation staying together, but that you can opt out and not do it. Right. This principle was used for the ordination of women to be priests. Mm-hmm. Certain people could opt out. Now, what happened then is instructive. Yes, people could opt out, but they're very frowned upon. Of course, you then find it difficult to find a vicar as more and more women take that role. And then the other absolute promise was made time and time again, was that making women priests was not the sake of making women as bishops. And that wasn't even to be considered and wasn't on the rise, and now we have women bishops.
We do indeed.
Now, the reason that distinction was made, the main evangelical objection to women is not them being leaders, is not them being priests or preachers or being leaders of local congregations, but them being the overall head, because they believe that goes against the biblical mandate of the man being the head and then under Christ, in the home and in the church. And that overall doctrine should be looked after and guarded by men, because the Apostle Paul goes back to creation to make that point. When the Apostle Paul talks about it, he says that women are not to be the protectors of doctrine, because, look, Eve was deceived first. That's how that's interpreted.
Yes.
Now, that being the case, we can see, well, if you give way a little bit, you've given away everything, because they're not going to stop these people. So when he says, oh, yeah, we're just going to bless civil partnerships and already existing same-sex marriages, and if we eventually do go down the route to marrying them, you can opt out. Yeah, that's just the start.
Yes.
What do you think? Oh, Norman, what do you think?
Can I ask you a question, Peter? What is a blessing?
That's an interesting point, because in this case it means absolutely nothing. It's a way of shoehorning in marriage. A blessing declares God's favour upon particular people, in this case a particular union between two people.
In which case, for you to say God is in favour of these two people in what they are going to do, you're actually sinning.
Yeah.
Because you are transgressing what God has written in his instruction book. It says, don't do this. Don't flick this switch. And you are saying, God, bless these people as they flick this switch. And the book says, don't flick the switch.
Yes. Yeah.
So I just don't see the underlying logic behind it. Now, I personally, at the end of every email that I send to people, put God bless.
Yes.
And I do that deliberately because I am asking God to bless that person who I am talking to. But it's up to God to bless. It doesn't make the slightest bit of difference just because Norman's saying it. No, who on earth is Norman?
Yeah.
So to have this situation that says it's all right if we do this, if we do this, if we do this, the person who is saying this is putting themselves in the place of God and saying that I have the right to say that this person should actually be blessed. And that's not a good thing to do, is it? Because it's God who blesses.
Yes, I think the key thing about when you say a blessing upon a person, I think that's always good. You wish God's blessing upon a person. It's specifically stated in the Bible that God loves everyone. So asking God to bless a person is one thing. But to bless a certain act, or in this case, marriage or union between two people, you're blessing something in this that we regard as sinful. Yeah. You could still wish God's blessings upon those people, which I do. I want God to bless those people, and I want them to be, in the long run, happy and blessed people. But, you see, blessing doesn't mean happiness in the short term necessarily, or happiness in the moment. That's what's forgotten. One thing I think, before we get on to, I think, an important point about the togetherness that you raised, Beryl, is he talking about church leaders and the church being together as well? That's the question we can come to. But first of all, I want to highlight this to the listener. Just think about this. When you make a decision to speak out about something, say you think, well, no, I agree with you, Norman and Beryl and Pete, I agree with you lot. same-sex couples. That's wrong. It's obviously not what's taught in the Bible. And you say, well, I'm going to say something about it. You say something about it, and you say you're a horrible bigot, and you're told that. Does that make you shut up? Because for most people, as soon as you call them a name, they're quiet about it. The technical word that I like to talk about for that, it's called cowardice. If you can't stand up for your beliefs just because someone calls you a sexist or a homophobe or a racist, doesn't stop them saying it. So people will call you all those sorts of names, and it has to not bother you, because only God's opinion should ultimately count. But if you have found yourself being swayed by not wanting to be called a name, then ask God for courage that you'll be able to stand up for the truth, because I think it is needed. I don't mean put up a message on the company notice board so you get fired. I mean in appropriate places that you stand up. But, Beryl, what do you make of this idea of keeping the church together then? He's offered an idea, the Bishop, in this suggestion in his booklet, that you allow same-sex civil partnerships to be blessed and for same-sex marriages to occur, but there's an opt-out clause, so you would have some parishes that wouldn't do it. Do you think that this is a good way forward? Or, in fact, would it be better if the Church of England actually split into two parts? Parts where they affirm the biblical teaching and parts where they don't. There's a third option. We just bumble along as we are.
I find that difficult because I don't want to condemn anybody. And that's not because I'm a coward, but I wish people would exercise a bit more discernment over the whole situation. I think the problem to me lies in the fact that there are many men who have same-sex attraction.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And many women who have same-sex attraction. Let's not be gender-specific about this. Mm-hmm. Who are not interested in the sexual side of marriage.
Right.
Or civil partnership. Mm-hmm. They just relate better to people of the same sex.
Oh, right. So not sexually attracted, attracted in another sense. They like being with
yes.
them. Mm-hmm.
They're perhaps lonely people. Perhaps they've been abused in the past, mm-hmm. and they don't trust members of the opposite sex.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they just want to live their life alongside somebody else of the same sex who they relate to.
Yes.
And they would say, why should I not have a civil partnership? Mm-hmm. The problem with that issue is that we, like Queen Elizabeth I said, we don't want to make windows into people's souls. And ideally, if people stuck to their word and stuck to their convictions, we could accept that. But the problem is that once you give people an inch, there will be people who will take a mile.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. I will go further. I think civil partnership was always a flawed idea. And the idea of having tax breaks for married people, I understand the idea behind that. The problem with it is the idea of taxation at all, as though the government not taxing you, they're somehow doing you a favour. They shouldn't be taking your money in the first place. And so another shocking view of mine is we shouldn't have income tax. I don't see the point of civil partnerships or same-sex marriage, for that matter. I think if you want to have a same-sex relationship, well, go ahead. Well, no one's stopping you. There is no human right being stopped. People say it's a human rights issue. Gay people, lesbian people, should be allowed to get married, and they weren't allowed to get married before. Yes, they were. Always, everyone was allowed to get married. They just had to marry people of the opposite sex. The response to that, people say, yes, but they don't want to. That's not a right, is it? You suddenly switched it to personal preference. Marriage was always available for everyone, but you didn't have to do it. But you could, if you wanted, have a same-sex relationship with someone else. By the way, in the Bible, there's a particular activity that is punishable by death, and people think that homosexuality is punished by death, but it actually refers to sodomy being punished by death. That's anal sex, for those who want it graphically spelled out. It spreads disease, it's bad for society if you allow that. So it's obvious why that was in place. However, it is seen, homosexuality, as sinful. It's a sinful desire. So if you don't act on sinful desires, you're not a sinner. Homosexual relationships are wrong. But people do all sorts of things that are wrong. They don't expect them to be sanctioned by the government.
No.
And sanctioned by the church. So that's why there's an argument about this. For a long time I haven't thought this, but I'm beginning to think we need to call out a new lot of churches, or to call out of the church people who stand up for biblical truth. Now here's the issue. If you do that, people have had different points at which they differ, at which they would draw the line. So there was a group called Reform, which was conservative evangelicals, made up about 10% of the Church of England, who thought that making women priests was wrong. And then there was Forward in Faith on the Anglo-Catholic side, thought it was wrong. But now you got another lot saying homosexuality, no, that's definitely wrong. We would leave for that. I guess what I'm saying is it would be good to split up, but then it needs to come back together at some point. But it will go through a horrible period of turmoil. What about other churches? Are other churches as split on this issue of homosexuality?
Well, I would say that the Methodist churches, they have actually made a decision on it, and I'm sure that there are Methodist churches who disagree with the decision that's been made. I don't think the Baptist Church has gone that far yet. I don't agree with what the Church of England is doing, but I tend to look at it as, well, that is the Church of England. They're making their decision.
And may their bed let them lie in it. Yes.
And the same with the other churches. I would want the church that I attended to be a church that knew where it stood.
Yeah.
As far as Jesus Christ was concerned.
But yes, what do you think, gentle listener? This is where we turn to you. Let us know. You can get in touch with Flame Radio, flameccr@gmail.com, and you can get in touch directly with Beryl and myself at berylandpete.com. You just go there, make sure you're subscribed to the podcast version of this show, and you can leave a comment on this and every episode.